Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's AHDB webinar, the title of which is Practical Budgeting and Cash Flow Forecasting. I've got some housekeeping rules and regs that we need to work through first. The first is that you're all muted, so we can't hear you, but hopefully you can hear us. Neither can we see you or you see us. There are questions that you can make tonight. There is a box you'll see on your screens where you can type in questions to us, and we'll see them and we'll try and address those as they come in, or we'll come to them at the end. In terms of the end, timing wise, we're hoping to finish by 8 o'clock or thereabouts. The other point to make is that there are basis points available tonight. If you would like to register for those, you'll see in the questions box in your screen again, just enter your name, postcode, date of birth and your basis number, and we'll then get those registered through basis for you. Although this webinar is live tonight, we're actually going to record it, and it will be added to the AHDB YouTube site, so you'll be able to listen to it again if you so wish. And for those that haven't been able to listen live, they can catch up later. Finally, as ever, we always welcome feedback on this webinar or indeed ideas for future webinars. So please feed those back to us because it helps us shape the future program. Okay, so we'll make a start. This evening is all about taking the fear out of an often dreaded task. Many in the arable sector are feeling the practical impact of a long wet winter, and indeed, of course, the livestock sector too. Those lambing are looking for early grass, and those with extensive dairy systems and spring calving herds are looking to turn out soon, and it's not ideal. So to be indoors talking about and preparing budgets and cash flows may not seem to be the best antidote. However, regular users of AHDB will have detected a shift to a more proactive financial business management theme. Not least, some of you will have come across and be using Farm Bench and a focus on cost of production. The subject of our webinar tonight, Practical Budgeting and Cash Flow Forecasting, is one that many shy away from, but really it need not be so difficult, and it can be a really useful management tool, and one which we're going to try and unpick and make easier tonight. I'm joined tonight by Pat Tomlinson and Nick Bragg, who will all introduce ourselves. I would also like to say a thank you to Pat, whose offices we're meeting in tonight in Taunton in Somerset. So I'll start introducing myself. I started off actually from the same stable as Pat, Reading University, from where I went to ADAS for a few years operating as a business consultant, then a career in banking with HSBC, agricultural banking, before I took this current role with AHDB as a knowledge exchange manager on the cereals and oilseeds side. But not surprisingly, given my background, taking an interest in the finance side. So that's a little bit about me. Now, Pat, that's me by my picture as well. I'll get used to clicking as I talk, which should be possible. Over to you, Pat, and a little bit of an introduction to yourself, please.
Thanks, Dolbear. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for thanking us. We're obviously very welcome. We're delighted to host you. And just a bit of background from myself. I'm now well into my 50s and had what's now a 30-year career that I've described in and around the finances of agriculture. As Philip said, an agriculture graduate, teenage years working on farms, and always in and around agriculture. So there's a 15-year banking career with HSBC Agriculture, and then about 10 years ago I decided to move into accountancy, qualified as a chartered accountant, and now literally as of the last few weeks set up our own business specializing in accountancy work for farming businesses. So I think the kind of perspective I hope to bring either tonight or to our clients is one of kind of poaching from the term gamekeeper, or seeing the benefits of budgets both using them and producing them, and trying to see both sides of that coin. Look forward to tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. And we'll move on to Nick. We're sorry that Claire can't join us tonight. She's back at home generating cash flow. But Nick from Frogmary Farm, just like to introduce yourself.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and again, thank you for that. My wife Claire and I run and own Frogmary Farm Limited on the edge of Somerset. We farm and manage 2,500 acres. We have a 2.6 meg AD plant. AHDBs look after hauling of feedstock and digestate. Industrial and commercial lets on site. Conference facilities, a cafe which has just been built, and also a wedding barn. Shepherd's huts. Classroom which we host about 7,500 school children a year. And also open the gates up to 3 other large events each year, and currently have 16 full-time staff, but that will soon increase with the adding of the cafe and wedding facilities.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the definition of a well-diversified business. Plenty of budgets and cash flows over the years, so we'll come back to that in a minute. Thanks, Nick. So just a reminder to everybody that tonight is and can be interactive, so please do feed in questions as we go along in the question box, as I've referred earlier. So I'm going to kick off with just a bit of a definition of budgets and cash flows. They are different. In my terms, budgets are projected holistic figures for a particular project or a particular whole business, and for a defined whole period, often a year, or it can be multiple years. So hence budgets would include non-cash items such as depreciation. So for example, a budget for an arable farm for next year would be a total of main sales items, less variable costs, less fixed costs, rent, finance, drawings, to give an overall projection for the year. Cash flow, as the name suggests, predicts and monitors the physical cash in the business or a project for the period set. Normally we would see cash flow broken down on a monthly basis, but perhaps depending on the nature of the business, it could be a quarterly cash flow. So those are my loose descriptions and differentiation of budget and cash flow. Pat, would you add anything to those descriptions?
Just a couple of small points on it, really. They're very different, profit and cash flow. Often, or budgets and cash flow, the two should always be able to be reconciled, and that link between what's the cash position on a business. You can have a very profitable business that can have no cash if it's investing, if it's growing its valuation, but you should always be able to reconcile the two. And so the two documents kind of can go hand in hand, and indeed should be reconciled to each other.
Okay, so let's unpick budgets a little bit more, trying to work out what makes a good one and a useful one. Pat, sort of picking up on the purpose of budgets first. There are budgets and budgets.
Yeah, and there's two main kind of types, as I would see it. One is what I call it is a tactical budget, usually the budget for the next year of what we think is going to happen on a business. And that's very useful for year-on-year purposes, and very separate what I tend to call steady state budgets. So if one's making a big investment or thinking about making a big investment, to actually leap forward to the first steady state year of that investment and see what that looks like. Typically to ask the question, should we make that investment? And if that feeds the answer, yes, it is sensible to make it, then backfill the gap of the actual years leading up to that steady state. And so that's the two main types. We may touch on mini budgets during the year, partial budgets, looking at slight changes in the business and what are the impacts. All loosely described as budgeting process, but I think that, especially if you round off, it's about forecasting and projecting and trying to inform decisions where it comes into its own.
Thanks, Pat. Nick, you'll have done your fair share of budgeting for your enterprise. What in your books makes a good one?
Being honest with oneself when you're preparing them, and the accuracy that you maintain in creating them as well. And really following on with what Pat was saying, it's if you're looking at it as a new section within the business, clauses, and also the accuracy of starting up a new section within the business.
So how far ahead are you of the project in terms of preparing your budgets?
We would be looking predominantly between 6 months and 12 months, and reviewing every 6 months, and then really looking back at actuals on budgets.
But you've done we've got an AD plant, Nick, which is a long-term project, perhaps a 25-year budget. How on earth did you go about sort of building up that for the project?
In the early days, very difficult, until we had a year or so to benchmark against. We'd come out of growing potatoes, for the main reason that we had no idea what our sales projection forecast would be each year. So going back to the accuracy of cash flows, it can only be accurate sometimes as the day that you actually make it, with different prices and structure. But benchmarking, once you do begin, makes it much easier to look back at historic.
This might be a bit of a facetious comment, but building what you said there, Nick, about accuracy, one of the phrases I quite often use is the only thing you know about a budget is that the day it's produced, the day after that is it's wrong. But that doesn't make it wrong to produce a budget. It's the best estimate at that time. And just knowing how your business varies from that best estimate. Couldn't endorse strongly enough your point about being honest to oneself about the assumptions we put in it, and it's to inform the decision. So more honesty that can come from that, and transparency, the better. I suppose the worst budget, well, that's the right question to say. Now, the worst budget is one that's based on false assumptions or unrealistic assumptions.
We have got a question coming, which is, how much wiggle room would you build into approximating items within the budget in the absence of actual costs?
The stars all around here. Pat, you're an accountant. Wiggle room.
Yeah, this is the not the cheating factor. It's the honest recognition to yourself that you're going to need some sparing, that the budget isn't going to be met, and rather than not spending that last bit of time being accurate, recognizing there's going to be a degree of variability, and depending on the size of the business, I would almost always put in a contingency, and across varying businesses I've known that to be tens of thousands of pounds a month down to a couple of £1,000 a month. But yeah, really important to put in some contingency, but as a measure against the size of the business. So you're recognizing that the budget's going to be wrong. You're not quite sure why, but you want to know what you want to have a little bit of spare room in that budget.
So Nick, when you prepare your budgets, who are they for ultimately?
For us, and also the bank manager, but predominantly ourselves. Claire looks after the accounts within the business, so we can see our own cash position on a day-to-day basis, and making sure that our budgets are falling in line with actuals.
Okay, that's I can see some overlap developing here with cash flow as well.
Can I just say a bit of a kind of poacher turned gamekeeper comment? So from banking days, we would certainly have asked for budgets to be produced, and I genuinely think that a bank shouldn't ask for anything that isn't of value to the business. And if you can try, and the worst reason to do a budget is because the bank's asked for one. And maybe that helps seeing the value to the business and almost approach it that you happen to then copy the bank. And they've asked for it, but actually the primary purpose for it is for the good of the business. That's just a probably a poacher term going to be one. It's much nicer to be copied in on something as the bank manager rather than have something produced because you've asked for it.
So when we've talked about drawing up a budget, and the only time it was accurate was the day you drew it up, because things change after that, and we've talked about leaving wiggle room. But when do you get to a point of saying that budget was just rubbish, rip it up and start again?
I would say never lose sight of the original budget, but there will be times during that budgeting period that it might be right to say we now learned some stuff that we really didn't know at the time. And especially when almost going back to those steady-state budgets I talked about, if that's the benchmark, it's always good to refer back to it. And there's one really good way of always being on budget, and that's always updating the budget for actuals. And then you know you're always up to date with the budget, and you kind of lose sight of the original budget. But you can take a perfect example now on arable farms. It is pretty well recognised now that the impact of the weather is going to have a really severe impact on physical situation and income from the 2020 harvest. And that may be midway through the year for many. Perfect reason to re-budget. And almost back to the reason when we talked about the benefits of budgets, quite often I think they're not done because the business, the owners fear what the result will say. And so there's almost this perception it's better not to know, whereas actually putting it down on paper and actually recognising the impact, it can start ease some of that anxiety and just predict where we're going to be, which starts the process of saying, well, what are we going to do about it? How can we cope with it? It's actually a stress buster rather than a stress causer once it's produced.
So Nick, do you keep the budget that went wrong and that you started again with? Do you find value in looking back at the original?
Completely agree with on the back of this season, we're re-budgeting for the situation of crops, not only the value of crops, but obviously the quantity of crops. So on two items. But yes, we would be looking back and continually updating.
Okay, so I think we're covering some of the issues here that we had sort of pre-planned to talk about. I guess what we haven't touched on so much is the sort of level of detail, granularity that you would put in a budget that you're preparing. And Nick, I'll ask this to you first, perhaps.
We would go down to every detail that we possibly can, from stationery in the office to postage, right the way through to machinery.
But if you're doing a budget for an AD plant costing hundreds of thousands of pounds, is it still relevant to look at 75 quid's worth of stamps each year? I'm being facetious, but you know what I mean.
For us, it is.
Right.
And we, for our business and the way that we run it, that's how we like to look and delve into every section within the business, just to make sure that we're forecasting correctly, and then we can look back at to see where we've gone wrong and what changes we can make next time.
I guess it's a balance as well between making it such an enormous exercise covering everything under the sun that just becomes too big and impossible to think about, but one which actually you can use and be practical about.
Yes, I think that once you've got one up and running, it's then very, very easy, or much easier to replicate going forward. Because you're benchmarking, you've got information to relate to.
I think that you're in a position, Nick, of budgeting is a norm for you in your business, and not a challenge, just part of the business to do that. For those that haven't kind of embarked on the budgeting process or what would like to, it's easy to be put off by detail. I think that there's always a stage, if we go into too much detail on too small numbers, that can kind of detract from the benefit of getting the budget done. I'll probably use the example of us accountants, I only swore then, us accountants, where you see a set of perhaps quite traditional accounts presented, where you've got a line that says telephone 700 quid, and then another line that says seed spray 150,000. And you kind of think, they don't both deserve their own line in the accounts. And there's nothing wrong with getting to what we would call a level of materiality. For your size of business, you might say, well, we're not going to interrogate costs less than £1,000, we're just going to lump them together. But that's a very individual decision. I find the construction of budgets and accounts pretty boring, to be honest. It's the use of them that I find really interesting, and it's trying to not detract from the benefits of having it by making it a laborious process. And of course, technology now, we might come onto systems and how you might do it. Technology makes that a lot easier now rather than having to do everything manually. So well, I would agree with Nick, the level of granularity you can go to, great. But for those that are starting on the process, don't let that put you off the principle, that level of detail put you off the principle of doing it would be.
I think this is something we've seen in AHDB with Farm Bench on the cost of production analysis. It's a whole new world for many people that haven't done it before, and it's starting off at a simple level and light level, and gradually as you get more comfortable, go deeper and in more detail, and it's almost like a drug. The more you start to discover about the business, the more you want to learn about it, and then it doesn't become such hard work from a standing start.
That's great. We've got another question come in, which is how often should your live budgets be updated with your actual figures to sense check them against budget position of the business? So how often you go back and change it over?
I guess that's the monitoring question, Nick, isn't it?
For us, we do it every 6 months. And again, that's just how it works for us.
Do you do a rolling 12-month budget, Nick? Or
Yes.
Yeah, so you update the rolling 12-month budget every 6 months?
And sometimes we roll that on forward for 5 years.
Yeah.
But then break it down.
Yeah. And I think, I'm not sure whether the question, that's the kind of, how often do you re-budget? There's also the question, how often do you compare? And whether we're getting on to then probably monthly is a good discipline to actually compare how you're doing compared to budget.
I guess it depends on the nature of the business of it. I mean, if you've got poultry going out every 35 days or whatever, you need to be on it much more regularly than you do if you're selling 3 arable crops in a year, and buying fertilizer once a year and seed once a year.
Now, Philip knows me well enough to say why. I can ask him why.
Because I guess that, if the figures aren't going to change every month, and something's only going to happen in your business every 3 months, well, then you only really need to deep dive into those figures as they're likely to happen.
Yeah,
that would be my view.
You
disagree with that?
No, I think why. I think that I was going down the side. If you're an arable farm, you sell a lot of your crops, a number of decisions a year, but not necessarily every month. But what you do have every month is expenditure. And so it's kind of, there might be, especially when you get into the miserable overheads, where it's not the seed for spray, it's actually the wage bill, the electricity bill. Is having a monthly thing seems to be quite a sensible time to just catch up on that. But
I guess we're sort of straying into the sort of differentiation here between budget and cash flow. And the old adage, cash is king, is absolutely true, of course, because cash what pays the bills. But I think it is more than just following what's happening on the bank statement, which is at best a month old. Nick, you say you follow the budgets every 6 months, but you're following cash on a more regular basis than that?
Exactly.
Daily. Okay, that's the ultimate, I guess. And does that come back to business need again, Pat? Or what would your sort of feeling about a comfortable period be?
I think there's almost a natural look at it every month. I suppose it depends on what cash availability you've got as well. Some that maybe can foresee a tough time. Again, let's talk about this harvest coming up. And at the moment that maybe your overdraft limit or your cash resources are not likely to stand it, then you'd be wanting to monitor it a lot more closely. But then again, that's getting back into the predict how much you need rather than, I'm not sure if I'm straight answering the question here, but it's some budgets are produced to prove that a business can stay within an overdraft limit, whereas that's the wrong answer. The budget should be produced to say how much overdraft you need so that you can project forward talk to the bank in advance, talk to yourselves about whether it's right to borrow that money before you then go to the bank and ask the bank to lend it. So I think I was straight off the question.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So many a farmer will have sat down and done his arable budget last September and the budget for the year, and then tried to or apply to that the normal cash flow around that budget as things would have normally happened. And clearly in the last year, or in the current year we're in rather, those, not only the budget but the cash flow is going adrift substantially. How can you, as you're preparing that cash flow, make allowance for the variability of cash coming in and going out of a business to be comfortable about how you're going to manage that business in the year ahead?
Are we kind of getting into some sensitivities here, or if you, again, if you're predicting cash, you wouldn't want to set, let's assume one's working in an overdraft environment, which most farm businesses would be, you wouldn't want to be within a small margin of that overdraft limit. You kind of set what you need and then decide what an appropriate level of headroom, what sort of sensitivity might you get. And also then start playing with, well, if wheat price alters by £10 a tonne, what does that do to our cash? And if you've seen it with spuds, if spuds altered by £50 a tonne, what does it do to our cash? So it is then driving questions of what if that can go around that. There's no shame and plenty of benefit in building in spare room or understanding the impact of change on that budget, rather than thinking the budget is going to be the answer as you go through.
Back to honesty, to seeing what's possibly happening on the horizon.
Yeah,
and it's just giving you information. If, like you said, if you are working with an overdraft facility, it's giving you options to discuss how to get around the situation.
Yeah, it's I think I'm going to take a likeness to the dairy sector. There was a period of terrible milk prices in 2015-16, and one of the things that struck me when talking to families that were having a tough time as a result, the first thing that they noticed was they were used to getting the monthly milk check in, paying the bills and having a little bit left over. They were coming across the first months in their farming career where the monthly milk check came in and it didn't even cover the bills. And the worry and fear and anxiety that caused, that there was really apparent, and causing a lot of anxiety and stress, whereas, that caught everybody by surprise, again, going into this harvest time, just recognizing it's going to be tough and trying to quantify it first and just start to answer the questions rather than have all the fears at the time, can help out.
So how big, Nick, we've been talking about, you've got a price of £130 a tonne of wheat. How big a parameter either side of a figure? Would you go plus or minus 10% or 20 or 30, or because that can obviously change the picture massively of a cash flow?
Certainly. It's fractionally different for us because all of our crops go into the plant and everything's contracted going in, so we know the price that we are going to get for our crop, and also other feedstock producers are going to get for their crop. Going back to when we used to have potatoes, yes, we would try and put a parameter on there of a ranging scale.
I guess by going back to our banking days, what we always used to want to know is, what the worst case scenario was. So what's the worst potato price you ever had, Nick? And how would your cash flow, how would your budget look if that prevailed in a particular year, and whether your business stood up or whether it needed help or whether it was a short-term blip or a long-term blip
to go with. A brilliant point there in our careers. Sorry, Nick, I'm putting you in the same age bracket as us, that's unfair. But there was times under the old cap supported regime where budgeting was easy. You knew wheat was going to be 101 or 102 pound a tonne, give or take a pound. The only thing that varied was yield. and it's it's back to that. If you get to an annual budget, it's seeing that budget in for that year. It's got a benefit, but actually in judging the viability of businesses and investments, then you've got to take a variation of prices, because we can all set as now we're going to see a variation of price. We are seeing a variation of prices, and good businesses in the worst of price years might make a loss and have a cash deficit. That doesn't make them bad businesses if in the context of maybe that 5-year horizon, on average, they're profitable and cash generative. It's just that they might have a bad year, and being able to read and interpret that year, not in isolation of that year, but actually in the context of, well, over a 5-year period, does it look good or bad or indifferent? You know, and I think that's where budgeting and understanding what makes a farm business look good is changed from those really predictable days of heavily supported prices and markets.
And I guess, Nick, this is where you've seen the benefits of doing multiple year budgets, so that if you're in a year when things are going a bit AWOL, then you can show to your funders and the rest of your business partners and yourself even that, you know, steady state is X, and this is the pathway back to that. So it gives you confidence, as Pat says, to take on the chin a year where you might lose money even, but know have faith in the fact it's coming back again.
Yeah, completely. And if there's, you know, other business developments that we're looking at, we want to see how that will slot in with other parameters of work that is happening around the farming business.
I'm just going to, if I may, just probably give Philip a slap on the wrist, because you mentioned the benefit to yourselves last, because you talked about the benefit to banks and sort of showing banks and funders, and it's just a kind of, we're all in this mode of the reason for doing it might be for banks, but actually one of the points I'm really keen to get over tonight is the benefit to yourselves before you happen to show the bank. And I know it's just it's a good example of just trying to reverse the psychology of it.
So it leads me on to another question. We've talked through some of these issues about cash flows, but in terms of the practicalities of it, Pat, AHDB have got some templates on the AHDB website. You'll have come across packages in the accountancy world and in the consultancy world that farmers and businesses can use as well.
Yeah, there's some fantastic software out there bespoke for farming businesses. But, you know, I do most of my clients' budget work. I start with a straightforward Excel spreadsheet because you can get into a mess trying to squeeze your particular business into a template that might be very good software in its own right, but actually it doesn't quite fit your business. Nick, yours is a perfect example of trying to squeeze your business into a template software. It must be really tricky.
Completely agree. Same, our software accountancy package is too difficult to use into the criteria that we're looking for. So again, we would build a budget out of an Excel spreadsheet.
So Nick, can you still get, from a practicality and ease of management point of view, can you still get that Excel spreadsheet to talk to, say, an accounting package that Pat might want to do your accounts easily, or whoever your accountant is, to do your figures easily from, rather than have to double take things?
Yeah, we do. We do employ consultants as well, so they'll put our spreadsheet from budgets into a format that then everyone understands, from ourselves, consultants, and bank at the same time.
So that leads me on to another question neatly. Thank you, Nick. Not planned, but you to perhaps touch on this, Pat, but who in your view should compile the budget and the cash flow, Pat? I mean, it should, you said you were ticking me off and saying it's for me, it's for us, the businessman. Is that the person who should be actually sitting in a dark room with a calculator and a pen and paper and an Excel spreadsheet?
One of our pet phrases is that, in terms of budgets anyway, is that the easiest thing in the world is to produce a budget, to put a set of numbers together. The skill is knowing what numbers to put in, and there's most of the information is known in the business operators minds. The skill is, if you're able to do that oneself, that's great. The skill, if you're not quite used to doing that, is being able to engage in discussion and conversation and tease out what's the right information from the owners. So quite often the input of somebody else can help out. There's a lot of really good budgeters out there. There's a lot of really awful budgeters out there. And the trick is finding one that gives that honesty, that realistic assumptions that you were talking about, Nick. However you best get that. There's certainly no shame in getting help to do it. There's certainly every benefit in doing it yourself if you're confident. One of the last bits, even if you do it yourself, it can be really powerful just to get another pair of eyes to look at it, a different perspective, you know, and make sure you've answered the questions that you want to, make sure you've asked the what if. So if you do it yourself, great, that saves expensive professionals time. But maybe the odd hour of, well, what do you think of it? Have a review of what we've done. Is it realistic?
Yeah, I guess the word of caution in my banking days as well, that, you know, yes, and as you said, no shame in getting a consultant or whoever to prepare figures on your behalf, but for goodness sake, make sure you know what's being prepared on your behalf, because you look a right Charlie sitting in front of your bank manager when you start getting quizzed, and you know less about the business than your consultant does, and he's paid you for the privilege.
Yeah. It's whether it be accounts or budget, and certainly Philip and I will have seen it in our careers where the accounts arrive or the budgets arrive and they stay in the envelope that they came in. And
that's no different to accounts either.
That's what I mean. Yeah, both. You know, and might be odd. I find the construction of numbers really boring. It's the use of them, whether they be accounts or whether they be forecasts, budgets, whatever. It's the use of them that really is enjoyable, and you should have people around you that can bring that to life, and you know, get value from the process. It's and you know, helping clients understand what that information is saying and getting value from it. And the construction of it is really boring. So I empathise with people who don't like producing budgets.
Completely agree with you on what you were saying, Pat. It's, I think employing professionals, if you're able to, I think it means that they tease out other questions that you wouldn't possibly be brave enough at times to put down yourself. So it's really coming back to the honesty situation and getting to a set of budgets which is working correctly for the business.
Yeah. It's and I enjoy all meeting with clients, whether it be going through a set of accounts or whether it be constructively using a budget, where they're actually smiling at the end of it, got value. It's not been a torturous process. It's done for the good of the business primarily, and that's enjoyable work for any of us involved around the sector, let alone useful for the businesses.
So we talk about the business. I mean, that might be husband, wife, and son and daughter, or it could be like Nick and Claire, you know, managers and several employees. The budget affects everybody. Who gets to see? Who gets to see the budget, Nick, and who should get to see the budget in your view?
For us in our business, we share with meetings along with our farm business manager. So he has a complete overview of the budgets, and he helps in the preparation of them as well. And also some departments will drill down, not every detail, but talk to some of the sections within the farming and the HGVs. It gives them interest how their sections are doing against budgets. So the staff do get great enjoyment in sharing some knowledge of the business, and I think it sometimes helps their morale without overburdening them with too many figures.
That's a good point. That's a really nice way of summarising that at the end. It's giving figures that are relevant and interesting. And there's also, you know, there's some confidentialities that certainly staff-wise you might not want to share, but it's easy to extract your private drawings out, take it out of the budget, take out your finance costs. If you know, if that's a private confidential matter, there's nothing wrong with extracting sensitive information, but making sure those that got an interest in it or can use it have access to it. It makes them feel part of the business, doesn't it? It's
So we're talking about sort of everybody in the business potentially being involved with it, but ultimately somebody's got to keep track on it. Nick, in your case, Claire is chief administrator of the buttons. But who would be in normal situations? Well, I'm not saying yours is abnormal. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, who is the best person to be monitoring the budget? I mean, is it as you say, Nick, like Claire, somebody really close to the nitty gritty, or is it somebody, Pat, as you mentioned, somebody who's a bit step back perhaps and can ask some more at a distance questions and almost not too close to be able to stand back and look?
Yeah, this is the person to monitor the budget should be the cheapest resource who's got the ability to do it.
Just say that again. That's a really good line. That's about
the cheapest resource that can do it properly. And certainly one of the most expensive ways of doing it is using your accountant. So there's plenty of cheaper ways of monitoring it, and then use the right people to get value from it. That's where the costs come in much better. So yeah, I'm quite candid. It's the cheapest way of monitoring it, and then spend money on using it, valuing it, bringing it to life, explaining it, interpreting it, all those sorts of things that you know, there's not many more things in life more fun than doing that.
We've actually found that in our benchmarking groups with AHDB as well, with Farm Bench, that there's no paid consultants involved in the room. It's actually, you know, the individual farmers, once they sit down with figures, they realise they can do it themselves because they've input it themselves, they own it themselves. Once they own it, they start taking more of an interest, and then the next bit is sharing it, whether that's with partners or other business people. It really sort of brings it to life. And we would always say that, you know, your competitor isn't always necessarily your next door neighbour, so don't worry about sharing certain things with them. More often than not, it could be somebody on the other side of the world that's a real competitor. So don't, not saying you've got to share what rent you're going to pay, Nick, with your next door neighbour, but other aspects of your business, it's quite possible to share and benchmark.
We have actually had a question that relates to that. So the question is, a budget may look realistic, but could be hiding inefficiencies. How do you challenge yourself on this? So,
well, I guess I've nearly just answered that question, that the only way to challenge yourself is to find out from somewhere whether what you're doing is right, wrong, good or bad. Now you could do that from a textbook and look up standard figures, but standard figures are standard figures. It's much better, and we find this with Farm Bench, with AHDB. If you're in a room confidentially with a group of neighbours with the same climate, the same soil type, the same challenges, suddenly your next door neighbour doing, I don't know what it might be. It could be a variable cost 20% better than you, or it could be a fixed cost item in the budget, you know, 20% better than you. To hear it from somebody you know and can relate to suddenly becomes very real, and you start taking notice of it. So benchmarking is key. I think that answers the question.
Yeah, we've had interesting examples where I would say our job, if we're invited to do it, is to make comment on the accounts, bring them to life, or the budget, and ask questions. But that's our job. We can't pretend to be technical experts, and there's such an array of technical experts out there now. You know, would they be the agronomist, for example, where it's not saying it'd be wrong for a financial person to say that's the wrong amount of spray. What would be right for that is to say that looks like you're spending more or less than others doing similarly, and that's where the sharing of information, Philip, can really come in. And it leads to then the questions of the technical expert. You know, it's leading that process. So
We're straying into sort of general benchmarking as opposed to budgeting and cash flows. But as I see it, you could also do this exercise in preparing a cash flow or a budget for your business. To speak or sit down with people that are doing a similar enterprise or thinking about a new enterprise, diversifying perhaps. And I'm not saying you'd want to talk about it with an immediate neighbour competitor, but somebody who's been there, done it, got the T-shirt, would be a great help in terms of putting together. You sort of, when we started, Nick, about the best budget being an accurate one. Well, the more you've got more chance of making that accurate if you speak to somebody who's done it and done it well.
But in your business, Nick, I think you described earlier on the benefit of your budgeting process, and use of it gets better year on year. You're building up a whole bank of information, experience. What are the right sensitivities in your budget? Where in your business, where are the areas to change? So the number of years you've been doing it now, it's not becoming easier, but it's becoming more informed. That's probably a better way of doing it.
No, it would be, and possibly less chances of getting it so hugely wrong.
Yeah.
And we will, don't be afraid. We do get it wrong.
Yeah.
But you learn from that, and that then gives you informed decisions to see when you look back, where you've gone wrong, what budgeting information you put to it, so you can possibly get it right next time.
Yeah.
I know we're straying off on benchmarking, but I think benchmarking really helps to put budgets together, and you can actually get enjoyment from it as well. Sharing information, confidentiality. There is enjoyment from it, and there's also enjoyment from budgeting when you can look back and everything has come together and the pieces have slotted in well.
Yeah, and I guess it's no greater motivating force than if you've drawn up a budget and are monitoring it for a plan, a new project or a venture, and you can see that coming together, and that will get you through, and it's on track. And I guess that gets you through many a rainy day when they do come.
No, completely, and especially if you're having to borrow money against a new project. It is also giving the confidence to those that are lending money that for that particular instance, your budgeting is correctly put together.
I'm not sure whether this is on track or not, but there's something that you said before, Nick, about your business on the AD plan, the crops. A lot of them are contracted, which clearly has its benefits. It might, I don't know if it's naughty, but it's a brief question. How do you know what the right contract price is?
We are, for us, the actual AD is owned by another company. They lease the site off of us, so we're contracted to the plant to produce feedstocks.
Yeah.
And we're set a figure that they will purchase the feedstocks for.
Yeah.
And we have got to make that figure attractive to ourselves and to others through machinery costing and labour costing to basically bring everything together right.
Yeah. So that's quite a good example. What I was trying to get, that's quite a good example of using the numbers, isn't it? To not just constructive, but actually informing decisions for you.
Yeah, and I guess that would apply as well to general businesses in the arable world. I mean, there's many of there's clearly the fixed costs, which roughly what they are year on year. So that will tell you what gross margin you need to achieve from your farming activities to cover those fixed costs and make a profit, and therefore you can start to build in parameters about what sale price, you just build a marketing strategy for your grain around that. Perhaps it influences your negotiations with your seed manufacturer, seed salesman, and so on. So this is almost sort of bottom up budgeting, and this strays into another world as well. But starting up what money you want to make or need to make, and then building in some respects the business around that.
I completely agree with you. That's in some ways that's a really good way to begin to put a budget together. Starting from the bottom up.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is, setting out objectives. Before you put pen to paper on figures, it's personal objectives, business objectives, and bringing all those into the process. I'm conscious that time's ticking away, and thank you, Michelle. We've had a few questions along the way. Are there any more that are sitting there waiting to be answered?
There are a few. So we may have touched on bits of these along the way, but in case people missed them or would like them covering more detail, we'll go through them anyway. So do the panelists think that a contingency plan is important? And if so, how do they recommend how one identifies what to design the contingencies for? So how do you decide what you need the contingencies for?
I guess that's one of the values of talking to people that have been there, done it, got the t-shirt before. One of the values, Nick, you were talking about, building up on experience and making the next budget better again. And we talked about the variability of potato price and what the worst scenarios you need to make contingency for. And I guess, Pat, you'll have seen businesses over the years where things have come out of the woodwork that no one would have ever envisaged.
Well,
and I guess the current coronavirus and how that's impacting businesses, sorry to be topical, but that would be a classic today, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think that the question is very well put. That it's very easy back to the technology now. Decide what the biggest sensitivities of your business. So if your wheat yield drops by a ton or increases by a ton, for example, what's the impact of that? What contingency would you want to build in for that? If the wheat price falls or rises by probably £20 a ton is probably a useful measure in the current climate. What's the impact of that? And accept that there are things that you just can't build a contingency in for. Whether that be the weather this year, whether that be coronavirus, but don't put yourself under pressure to identify all the possible contingencies, but identify what the real ones are that you do expect could exist, understand the impact of them, and if you've got those covered, you will be better placed to face the unidentified consequences like the weather and other interruptions.
So Nick, when you draw up budgets, would you always have a line for the unknown unknowns with a few zeros in it?
No, I think really we've got along the same lines. Perhaps just saying that you have contingencies in there that you're aware that might happen. Obviously, fuel price would be another good one, plus or minus on that, along with crop prices, and same with chemicals and fertilizers. You can't be too prescriptional on everything. It's just trying to be aware of it and cater for it the best way that you possibly can.
Yeah. The other one that crossed my mind was, which we've often talked about, was interest rates. Whereby if you've got £100,000 worth of debt and interest rates move by 1%, that's £1,000 impact. That may not be a significant amount, so don't worry about it too much. Whereas if your wheat yield dropped by a ton an acre, or the wheat price dropped by £20 a ton, that's going to be far bigger impact than. So it's understanding what are the relevant variables in your business, and don't be put off by what's put across as usual variables. Understand what your specific sensitivities are, understand what your risks are, and then make contingency plans for them.
Yeah, I guess the message I'd pick up from all this is, whether it's to your husband or wife or business partner or farm manager, as well as your accountant and your bank manager and your consultant, is communication is absolutely key in all this, to make sure everybody is aware of where the business is, what's going right, what's going wrong. And
for goodness me, there's one phrase that Nick used very early on today that is so relevant about the honesty to oneself in the process, and the honesty around the team. If you've got a team around you doing that honesty, that transparency, that's the fundamental bit, that being honest to oneself. And if it's a tough situation, then that can help have that honesty. And there's no merit in I suppose cheating oneself with the numbers. The best thing is to know what they say, and then you can make plans or investments accordingly.
Completely. And for us, having that team around us and regular meetings, everyone, not only ourselves but everyone else is fully aware of what is happening within the business and where the business is going. So if there is any shortfalls or unforeseen bits, there's awareness of it before anyone being completely shocked by it.
And I think that pretty much answers this question. So the question is, what is the panel's opinion on sharing the budget with, as an example, general farm workers in order to increase appreciation of the cost involved in running a business and thus becoming a more efficient business? So I think we're all in agreement.
We've answered that, and the thought I have on top of that is you don't have to share the whole budget, including your bank details and your personal drawings as the business owner to your farm manager, but you can share key parts of your budget, of your cash flow that he is responsible for. And you talked about it before, but almost it's not partial budgeting in the true sense of the word, but it's partial exposure to key individuals in the budget.
Yeah, there's a good one, and it's you don't want to bombard that lady or gentleman in your team with stuff they don't necessarily follow it. But it's, for example, you might have the tractor drivers that you're trying to challenge on or make sure they're aware of fuel efficiency and how they drive and this sort of thing, how they operate. Well, show them what the fuel budget is for the year. You know, just give them one or two little real key bits of information that they can lock into, they can relate to their day-to-day work. And you know, that might just be a tempter that the next year they want to know what the machinery repair bill is as well. What's the budget, so we can start.
So yeah, workshop repair bills. That's a really good one.
Yeah,
it sort of helps to focus their mind sometimes.
Yeah,
but it's just it's great sharing some information, but without overburdening.
Okay, so if you're training somebody up to take a joint responsibility to help produce budgets, where can you go for formal training and qualifications?
Well, numerous places I would suggest, but there are obviously training bodies. You can pay for the privilege, but be it consultants. You can go back to college. You know, there's plenty of evening courses, and then there's the learning by mistakes with the benefit of help of family and friends and fellow farmers.
yeah, I was going to, that's the university of life bit, isn't it, at the end, which one of the best ways to learn is on the job. And especially if it's bringing someone into that responsibility, then you can actually initially just absolve them from the responsibility and build up their confidence and their knowledge, and gradually hand over the responsibility as they're part of that process and see how it's done. And there's a natural link between the budgeting process and the accounts bit as well. You can bring it all together and gradually bring presumably that next generation into the financial parts of the business in a measured way, and hopefully get their hunger for it and appetite for it, so that they're you know, infused by it rather than seeing it as a necessary burden.
Nick, are you a self-taught Excel expert and budgeteer?
Totally. I'm still pressed on buttons, so I need help from Claire. Generally, that help is me getting out of the office. It's not clear, but I really enjoy looking at the figures and talking and discussing. It just gives you a clearer mind and a chance to reflect and talk about things.
Okay, we've probably got time for one last question, have we, Michelle?
I was going to say it's the last one, and it's quite a specific one. So is it safer to try and incorporate a sensitivity index into cash flow forecast rather than use our farm's average prices and costs based on 5 years or so? I tend to get bogged down with my eye-watering spreadsheets, so trying to add a sensitivity index fills me with dread. So any advice on that?
Nick, do you want to?
Yeah, I would say we would generally, for the greater part of it, we would steer clear of sensitivity pricing. We would go on average prices and historic thoughts of what your farm can produce, and then build in strategic allowances on crops and fuel and chemical prices that you think might be relevant.
Yeah, agree totally, Nick. Agree totally.
Well, I guess it comes back to what you said at the somewhere along the line, Pat, and near the beginning, that it's not so much the sensitivity of the figure, it's just picking a figure, but knowing what you've chosen, why you've chosen it, and knowing when it's up or down above that figure, rather than getting embroiled in lots of complicated sensitivities to Excel.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Time is beating us, so we'll have to crack on. So hopefully everybody, we've sort of tried to make cash flowing and forecasting sound not necessarily simple, but something that's not impossible, and something that you won't be afraid to grab hold of going forward. I put there on the screen a few thoughts that I thought would be relevant and hopefully not make it sound too scary. And I think the last thing I just want to say was, it's not impossible. Don't bury your head in the sand and just ignore it, because business management, cash flow, budget management, cash flow management is important, and it will help you, it will help your business, and it will help all the business people around you as well to make your business successful. Even help through difficult times of weather as we're experiencing at the moment. So I'd just like to finish with some thank yous. Thank you first to Michelle, who's been controlling, my colleague Michelle, who's been controlling the buttons here and keeping us on track. But of course, special thanks to Pat and to Nick for your contributions and your office space, and Nick coming in at a very busy time with everything going on and sharing your thoughts and really practical experiences and recommendations to go forward to help us all through the process. Just a reminder that we've recorded this webinar, so it'll be there on our AHDB YouTube channel again, and as ever, lots more information on the AHDB website for you. Looking forward to next month. We're trying to hold webinars on a monthly basis, so the next one is on the 1st of April, and we'll be looking at variety selection, which I guess is looking forward to harvest 21 already, and not too soon to do that with my colleagues from HDB. So with that, I'll close off. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of your evening.